Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to get into disagreeing agreeably. And it's going to be a good episode because that's exactly what Mark and I are going to do.
We already started.
We did.
We've been talking for like 15 minutes and we should have been recording it the whole time. Anyway,
yeah,
I think it will be. I think we'll have a good discussion.
Yeah, it will be. And so, we're going to get into some things that, we disagree with, and we're each going to share our opinions. And so I'm going to start out by saying, I think there are two reasons why, Mark, that you and I can do this. And it comes to respect and empathy.
Yeah. Right.
So,
I agree with those.
Yeah. So each one of us respects the other person, and we respect the fact that we think and believe differently, and we're okay with that. We accept that. And the other thing is that we can empathize with the other. So I understand where you're coming from. I can say, I see your point. Even though I disagree, I see your point and I respect that your views are different than mine.
But there's another piece, and I know maybe it fits into empathy. And it's what you and I were talking about before we started recording, that my sense of you is that you have very strong beliefs, which I think are important for people.
Yeah.
And I just don't have any problem with people who speak strongly. But that the piece that I think is important is that you allow other people to also have their beliefs.
Yes.
And to find a way to live that, they find their own happiness and joy and meaning and purpose in. And so what I think is important, what I get from you is you have beliefs, but it's okay for others to have different beliefs and to live their life in a different way. Now, I don't know, you've never said that about me, but I believe that that's what I have. I think to be a therapist, you really have to be in that mindset. Is that I have strong beliefs, but I see people who are very conservative, and I can do that, and I can validate the way they live and their belief system because I believe it's good for them, and I believe that I can live my life and have a good life, and I think they can too. So.
Exactly. And I think another important component in the dynamics between us and why it works is we respect each other enough that we're not trying to persuade the other person to our beliefs.
Right. I would never try and do that with you. Well, for one thing, because I do respect that you have the strong beliefs, and honestly, it doesn't work for me. But if it works for you, which I think it does, and for your children, I think that's wonderful. I really do. And so to have, what you have with your faith, the belief, the community, all of the positive things that you get just doesn't work for me. And so so you're right. It's respect. I don't know if what I said, about you allowing others, does that fall within empathy? Maybe it does. I don't know. It feels a little different to me than empathy.
I think, I think you're right. I think yes and no, because, and with a lot of religions, they often they proclaim, and I won't pretend that my religion doesn't also do this, that we have the truth, right? That is what my religion proclaims. Now, I can believe that, and I can live my life in accordance with that. I can be very happy and accept that not everyone is going to agree with me. And it's not just this idea of, I guess this phrase that I hear often that drives me crazy is in religion is love the sinner, hate the sin. Don't tell people they're sinning.
Yeah, that's probably not a good way to start off a relationship.
It's really not. You can just say, I can respect you as a person. We can even be friends. We can get along really well. We can have a good conversation. We can have a good relationship. We can respect one another and just move on and, find other things that we have in common. And that's, I think, one key component in any good relationship, in any type of relationship, is you have to find the common ground first. And
Yeah.
so,
And so you and I certainly have a lot of common ground around
yes.
family and
Hmm.
marriage and things like that. But I want to go back to something because I don't know if you and I can really tease this out or not. But what you said is true that and I believe this, that you believe that your faith has the truth,
Hmm.
but yet you can also allow other people, I guess, in your mind, that you wouldn't say this, that are living a life that you think is maybe not the right way.
Hmm.
Um, and so, what is that allows you to do that when so many people can't? And I think that it's one of the things that is really wrong with our country today
Yes.
is that so many people have that faith like you do, and
Hmm.
whether it's your faith or whatever faith is, where they believe they're right, but then they aren't able to allow other people to live a different way. So I don't know what that is, but I think that's the difference, right? Right
Right.
there is that
Hmm.
you have that belief, but you can also allow other people to have their own way of living.
So,
So what do you think that is?
my beliefs.
Well,
So,
no,
let,
yeah, but
let me
if it were your beliefs, then more, a
let.
lot of people would have it. And I want to acknowledge, I live in Salt Lake City,
Mhm.
which there are certainly a lot of LDS people here,
Right.
but and there are many who believe the way you do. So I'm not suggesting that
Sure.
there aren't. There are many that I run into that, but there are many who don't as well.
So let me go into my beliefs here a little bit. And
Okay.
this isn't me being overtly preachy, right? And so, but
Okay. Right.
a core center of our beliefs is agency.
Right.
And I think
Okay.
that's what
I
it
like
comes
that.
down to. Yeah, and so for me, that's what it comes down to is, agency is a core part of my beliefs. I believe very strongly that we all have a God-given right to choose.
Okay.
And the same as, my religion doesn't force anything on anybody. I wouldn't feel comfortable forcing it on somebody else. And so, I can accept and love people's agency. And it took me a long time to come to this, to come to terms. I mean, this was a years of process of coming to this idea that, you know what? I live a very happy, religious life. I've built my life around my religion and I love my life. I have a desire for everybody to have the same happiness that I do, whatever it looks like for them. I'm not in charge of other people. I am in charge of me and I am in charge of being a good person. And what is being because, that is also something that my faith promotes is, charity towards others and being a good person and being kind to others. So, how do I personally do that? I do that by accepting people for who they are and, just being kind. I can listen to somebody, I can validate them. Now, I want to stop right there for a second and talk about validation because so many people struggle with this. And we've said this
Right.
before, but if
Right.
anybody is new to the podcast, then they will know that validation doesn't mean I agree.
It
Validation,
doesn't necessarily mean you agree.
yeah,
It can.
it
I mean,
can.
you can agree, but
Yeah.
you're right. It doesn't mean that.
You can say to someone, I understand your perspective, or I understand where you're coming from. And you can genuinely mean that, but it doesn't mean that you agree with them. So, Mark, we've talked about religion before, and I have said to you, I understand why you feel the way you do about God. And I respect that. You respect the way I feel about God, and we're fine. And, and that's it.
But what I want to point out is I don't know that I'd heard people talk about agency, and that makes sense to me.
Hmm.
Just you bringing that up, the
Yeah.
idea of choice, and so
Yep.
that it makes sense that that is an important part of your faith. And what I'm throwing out is I don't know if that's true for a lot of people who are religious, who believe in God. But I think that's probably what makes the difference. So see, you answered my question. So good
Yeah.
for you. Well, I was trying to figure out what makes this possible, what makes it different. And I think it might be that is your belief that everyone has a choice.
Right. And, I would hope that, anyone listening can accept that of everybody, right? I mean, now I'm not going to
But a lot
pretend.
of people don't. I mean, I'm just
Right.
saying.
Right.
So I
And
think that's the difference. I think you hit on one of the key points, Liz, is
yeah.
that if we really believe that everybody gets a choice in how they live their life, even though
hmm
I believe that what I'm doing, if I believe in God, is the right way, but you get to choose. That's
Yeah.
what I think makes the difference. A lot of people don't believe that.
Right. Yeah. But I can
Right.
absolutely promote people living a lifestyle that makes them happy,
Yeah. Right.
and it's a big part of why I'm going into the field of psychology myself is because I want to help people find happiness, in whatever way that looks like for them. And I like the way you said, as a psychologist, you have to be able to do that, and you do. Because
Yeah.
in therapy, it is when you're the therapist, it is not about you. Your feelings, your thoughts, your opinions don't come into it, right? And
Right.
so you have to be able to separate your faith with from your work.
And I certainly know therapists. I mean, a couple come to mind that I've run into through my career who are very devout religiously, because I live here, who are really wonderful, amazing therapists who I often refer to
hmm
because I know that they believe like you do.
Yeah.
The acceptance. You can have a strong religious belief, and I can sit with other people who do not have that same.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
And
it's
be
okay.
Yeah, and be comfortable. And then one of the main reasons why I brought this topic up is because it's an election year. Now,
Right.
we're not
Which I think is a great topic because I've enjoyed our conversation so far. But
yeah.
election year, it brings out the worst in people,
Oh
I
my goodness.
think.
And it starts at the political level. So, and
Yeah.
this drives me so crazy that for whatever reason, in order for a candidate to win and to be successful, they have to attack their opponent, even though they're on the same side. It's like the only way I can win is if I bring the other person down. And I'm like, that feels so first grade to me. That is such
Is
a
there,
broken
are you talking
system.
about the
Debates in
Republican nomination,
the
the nominating
campaigns.
process? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, but I mean, Democrats and Republicans do it. I mean, in the 2020 election, Kamala Harris said terrible things about Joe Biden,
Oh,
and now
I
she's
know. I know. And
his vice president.
right. It's just that this year there aren't going to be any. There's no one who's running against Biden. But you're
Yeah.
right. They have to say these terrible things, and I
Yeah.
mean really terrible things, which I
Right?
think is awful. Like, why not? I don't understand why not go for here's what I believe, here's what I think I can do type thing,
hmm
as opposed to saying here's how terrible this other person is,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and let people decide more on what do you think this person can do for the country. I
And
agree
that,
with you. It feels
yeah.
crazy.
Oh man, it feels like we're living in bizarro world because, and then we get into politics and it's no wonder it feels like we're watching school children run our country.
And it makes for good television. I mean,
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's all about the
uh,
ratings. Oh
I don't
man.
know, but I don't think it's in the best interest of our country. It might be interesting and amusing to watch, but
Yeah.
ultimately, I don't think it's a good political process at all. I really don't.
I don't either, but I've never heard of a candidate being successful that hasn't
Oh, I
gone
think you're right.
that route.
Oh,
And
I think you're
so
you're absolutely right. And that isn't that sad
it is.
that that's where we're at.
Really is. Yeah. I
Really
mean,
sad.
it's why I don't know that I could ever go into politics because I mean, I can't be mean like
No,
that.
but I can't. I really do have a hard time people, going into understanding people going into politics. It seems one, it's a kind of dirty
Yeah.
business, and I think you like if you say I'm going to run for office, and all of a sudden you've got all these people who are trying to find all the dirt on you, right? Digging up all this stuff, and nowadays you can you can really find stuff from 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And is that how we should really be deciding who's going to, um,
Yeah.
run our country is what happened 50 years ago.
Well,
It's crazy to me, the
and
process.
yeah, and that's another thing and this drives me crazy about social media too. And
Oh yeah.
we'll go more into this here in a second, but people will go through and dig things up of people, something they said, 5 to 10 years ago. And I'm like, man, I don't want to be judged for something I said 10 years ago. I'm not the same person I was. I mean, I can remember a time in high school where I said in oh man, I may end up editing this out. I don't know, but I'm just gonna throw it out
It's
there
okay. Go ahead.
and just
Go ahead.
I said this. Now, keep in mind, let me set the context for people. I grew up in a very, very small, very conservative town. At the time, I didn't really understand how conservative it was until I grew older. And I said in and this was in rural Washington, which is, I don't know, maybe that makes it more ironic, but I said in my English class out loud, racism doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
I
But
was
I think that's
ignorant.
all right to say. But how old were you?
I was like
17?
16 or 17.
Uh, I mean, I'm remembering at a time I said this was in a religious meeting, and I said I used to be, I would say, pretty conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy came and was talking in a religious meeting. He was not. He was known as he was LDS, but
Mm-hmm.
pretty liberal.
Mm.
And I still, he ended up being a good friend of my father-in-law's. But I I said something that I think it was incredibly rude at the
Mm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
But I was young. I was like 22,
Yeah.
and I think so. I don't know that we should be held for things that,
Right.
like, how we've talked about the brain at 25, right? I
Uh-huh.
think anything before 25 ought to be wiped out somehow.
Yes.
Or, like
I
if I said this when I was younger than 25, it doesn't count. We get a free pass on things.
Exactly. I mean, and to be fair, I had never been exposed to racism
Uh,
and is part of it.
right.
I mean, my parents taught me to just treat everybody equally, and I grew up thinking, it's not about what they look like. It's, treat them equal no matter what they look
Hmm.
like. And I maybe a part of it was maybe it was just what I'd been taught about history. I just assumed in my, ignorant 17-year-old way that racism meant segregation. And so
Uh,
I thought once segregation was eliminated, that meant that there was no longer racism, that racism didn't exist. And I don't know why I associated the two so strongly. I mean,
well, Liz, you're
obviously,
17. You're 17.
it,
How?
that's,
And you're
yeah.
living in this,
Yeah.
small town. Was it a rural town? Is
Oh,
that
yeah.
probably? Yeah.
Yeah, there's probably more cows than people. Like,
Okay. But see, again, we just shouldn't be held responsible for things we say like that because we grow and
yeah.
mature,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
you have life experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it leads you to think differently about things. But getting back to the idea about how we can disagree agreeably,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think it's a lot about allowing people. I keep going back to what you said about choice,
Yeah.
allowing people to choose to live their life that brings them happiness, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, don't hold people accountable for, something they said
Yeah.
when they were young and ignorant. And, or even something that they said maybe in when things were historically different time too. Anyways, and so, but,
Right. I agree.
I, yeah, just let people, you
Grow
know,
and learn.
yes.
Let people be dynamic through the lifespan, which we
Yeah.
are. We're not static. We're dynamic. And
Hmm.
I'm not at 68. I am not the same person I was when I was 25. Not.
I'm not the same person
I
I
like
was when I
myself
was.
better now.
Yeah, same here. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, shoot, I don't think I'm the same person I was even just, 5 years ago. Curtis and
Yeah.
I were just talking about this,
Yeah.
just how much I have changed and how much my life has changed and evolved just, in the last 4 years,
Hmm.
right? I mean, okay, so I want to change track again here a little bit
Okay.
and get back into social media.
Okay, right, right.
And
We were talking about social media.
yes, okay, this drives me so crazy. I think social media has, I mean, multiplied this problem infinitely
Yeah.
because the big problem is that people, they find like-minded people on social media. And I want to say that that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are positives of social media. Like there are some good things, and there's nothing wrong with finding like-minded people. We're naturally going to do that. But when you only surround yourself with like-minded people and people who only think the way you do, you get stuck in an echo chamber, and then you don't think that there's another way of thinking. And then so you get even more stuck in your beliefs. And I'm not saying that you need to just not believe in anything. I'm just saying if you only ever talk to like-minded people and you only surround yourself with like-minded people on social media, it's going to be so much harder to hear the other person's point of view. And I think
R-
you need to do that.
Right, but there's an additional problem that I just want to mention, and I think we've talked about this before, and listeners to our podcast will know I'm really anti-social media
Mm-hmm.
because of, but I agree there's the positive points. But it's about artificial intelligence and AI,
Mm,
and we know that artificial intelligence, the way social media is set up, it can go either way.
yeah.
But it can, like if you make a choice, it takes you down a specific path, and so that
Mm-hmm.
reinforcement, the echo chamber, I think is absolutely true. But it's often led by not necessarily the person
Yeah.
making those choices. I think it's often the AI making the choices for them, and then they just click, 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 and so.
Yep.
But that's a whole different problem. But I think it's very real. I mean, we know that part is real.
Yes, it is. And so, if somebody want to find out, the truth, and it's so hard, I think, politically to find the truth. Man, this is a really, really tough, that's a tough position to be in politically to find the truth. I think you just
Well,
have
you
to
have
listen.
you bring up a word. What is the truth? I mean, is there
Yeah. Yep.
is there the truth, or
Yep.
are there different ways of looking at the world and how we live? I
Hmm.
mean, if you're trying to find the truth, I
Yeah.
don't know if that. I mean, I suppose in some ways that exists, but I think mostly our world is really a lot of grays and
Hmm.
different ideas. So,
Right. I mean, you can take facts, right? And there can be a myriad of different opinions on them, right? And
right.
so but even still, even I think facts can sometimes be disputed. And,
Well, that's certainly true.
I mean, I've said this before. Truth is in the eyes of the beholder. What one person perceives as true is going to be a different truth for someone else, right? So, I'm looking at your shirt, Mark, and your shirt is blue. Am I right?
No, it's gray.
Okay, then there we
It's
go.
it's just a lot. No, my shirt really does it look blue? I guess
Yeah.
no, it's
I,
very gray.
okay.
It's
It
a
looks like a light blue.
no.
Okay. But, oh, that was a perfect point. Is right. Is
Uh-huh.
like, it's all about perception.
Yeah.
And,
Well, right. But see what you're saying. I think let me just reflect this.
hmm,
I think you're saying you have to make an effort. You have to
yeah.
be intentional about going out and getting other ideas, and then I think it's because if you say, "Well, I want to find the truth," I think that sets you up for failure in a lot of cases. That I think you ought to look at the different ideas and think, "Okay, what resonates with me
Yeah.
in these ideas?" But if you're never looking at or listening to other ideas, then I think it's hard to make that choice.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to have those other ideas and then say, okay, what feels right to me?
Hmm.
And I think that's a good process, but I think a lot of people don't do it. They
No,
go into they go into the echo chamber, like you said.
yeah. Or
Yeah.
they find that one person who supports something that they do believe in, and then that's their source of all truth and information. I think that's another mistake that people make. Okay, so,
So what we call this is groupthink.
mhm,
And I mean, there are two political examples of this from both sides. One was Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the
mhm,
other was Bush in the 9/11, and both of them got into these situations, with groupthink where it was hard for anybody to look at different ideas
Yeah.
because you're just surrounded by people who who are reinforcing this one way of thinking. So it
Hmm.
it exists in a lot of ways, that group, the idea of group.
Yeah. And, so if you look at that and you can take facts, like the fact is 9/11 happened,
Right.
right? That's a fact that planes crashed into the Twin Towers. But there are so many perspectives and theories as to why it happened, who did it, who was responsible. And so it can so quickly get convoluted.
Yeah, but then after that, what do you do about it? I mean,
Exactly.
I think yes, well, and one informs the other. I mean, you have to come to some sort of decision about what was behind this, and then that informs whatever you're going to do about it. So you're right.
Hmm.
There. So when you're talking about the truth,
Yeah.
how do you ever come to what the truth in that particular case? I mean, and I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just
Right.
throwing it out there that that's a pretty good example of
Hmm.
how hard it is to really be objective. I think
Yeah.
for a lot of people, they can't be objective around things like that.
I mean, people will argue about the sky being blue.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
right.
like,
Or my shirt being blue. It's
right, right. And anyways,
you. Since I'm sitting here with my shirt on, you immediately agreed or took it as truth that my shirt is gray, not,
yeah.
not blue.
Well, I mean,
So,
okay, but that's the thing is, I'm going to trust your judgment better than
yeah,
mine because,
yeah.
you can actually see, touch, and feel the shirt. I am looking at it through a different filter.
Yeah, I'm turning a light on it. Actually, that doesn't help
Yeah.
at all. It makes it
No,
look blue.
it does. It does. It just, I mean, well, so when you put your arm up kind of like that, then it kind of, yeah. Okay. See, now it looks a little more gray.
Right.
But,
Okay.
but again, it's all about perspective.
Perception. I agree. You're
Yeah.
right.
And perception. And so, but the important thing, and one thing that we've tried to focus on is rather than focusing on is the shirt blue or gray, we could focus on, well, that shirt looks very warm and it looks very
Hmm.
comfortable.
That is, and both of those are true. It's
Right.
flannel, I suppose.
I
It's
think
not
so.
quite
Or
flannel,
fleece,
but
maybe. I
some
don't know.
something. It's like a mix between fleece and flannel. And so one, it's very comfortable. So yeah,
So we're finding the common ground here, and
right, right, right.
this is just a funny example because I mean obviously the color of the shirt doesn't really matter, right? But the point is we're finding common ground and we're having a discussion about it,
Right.
and so that's what you want to do on these kind of, I guess you might call them, these hot topics, is
Yes, I
is
agree.
find the common ground and have the discussion and just be okay with this idea that we're going to think differently. I think
Hmm.
that's one thing that we have forgotten how to do. And then I think a lot of it boils down to a lack of empathy, but we've just forgotten how to be comfortable with the idea of disagreeing. I mean,
Yeah,
it feels like we
yeah.
can't sit in a room anymore. Like, Republicans and Democrats can't sit in a room anymore. Like they can't be comfortable together. And I
And I
think
think that
that's,
is so sad. It's
yeah,
and it really is a disservice to our country that that
yeah.
can't be done.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think I've mentioned this before. I mean, this is and this is this might even be way before you were born. But Ronald Reagan, who was a conservative, very conservative, Tip O'Neill, a very liberal Democrat from somewhere back east, and Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House, and Reagan was president, and they would argue, during the day about all sorts of things and have
Hmm.
different opinions, and then in the evening they could sit down and have a drink together. And so it wasn't, they did not vilify each other.
Yeah.
They just had different ideas. Same thing about local, this is local, Ted Kennedy, very
Hmm.
liberal, and Orrin Hatch, very conservative, and they were good friends. And
Yeah.
people were trying to, and this isn't that long ago. Both are dead now, but they had different ideas about how uh, the, our country should be run, but they were very good friends.
Yeah. So around 2020, both mine and my best friend, she lives in Utah. That's when we both started getting into politics and found out that we're kind of on opposite ends of the aisle. And our
Hmm.
friendship has survived because we have so much else in common, so much else
Yeah.
that we can talk about that, first of all, we don't really go into politics a whole lot because, I mean, we both have young children and, this whole other life to talk about. But when we do, we can respect that we're going to disagree and we just,
Hmm.
you know, move on. And so I think we just need to learn. I really would hope that people will maybe stop losing friendships. One thing that drives me crazy on social media is when somebody unfriends somebody because they disagree. Now, I will say that if there are people who can be just belligerent and rude and just I can understand, or they are so biased and they're so negative and I guess they're argumentative. I can understand
Yeah.
unfollowing an argumentative person, but I would never ever unfriend somebody or stop following them because their views are different than mine. That's
So,
just intolerant to me.
and our listeners know that I like to come up with takeaways. See,
Hmm.
I think the takeaway is finding the common ground, and I often relate it to the work that I do. So working with couples, it's the same thing. Like
Yeah.
I see couples who argue about different things, and if you can get them to slow down and listen to each other, and often it takes me as the third party to say, here are, can you see the things that you're agreeing on? And they
Hmm.
often don't,
Yeah.
or they don't take the time to figure out here are the commonalities in what we're thinking. And so I think that is really the key, that I think this is true for most of us. I think we have more
Yeah.
commonalities than we do differences.
Hmm.
And if
Yeah.
you think about it in terms of our country, I think if you could really get the right and the left, the Republicans and the Democrats to sit down, in the end, I really believe there are more commonalities than there are
Yeah.
differences in
Yeah.
what we want for the country. Now, the ideas of how to get there are going to be different, but I think the place that you start the conversation and the way you have a civil conversation about it is to find the common ground.
And I think it's why, nothing can get done in our country is
Yeah,
because people will draw a hard line in the sand and they won't budge. And so that's why nothing gets done is because they get so stuck in what they believe
right.
in that they're not willing to just consider the other person's side. And so, it just starts with, I understand why you feel this way. I mean, a good example that we're not going to get into, it's just a good example, is gun control. Very,
Right.
very
Right.
hotly debated topic in this country.
Right.
And so, I think when it comes to this, you have to take a step back, step outside yourself and say, okay, what is driving people to think this way and to believe so strongly in whatever way they do, and try to understand why they believe so strongly, for or against, what is driving them.
Yeah.
And then you
And
can sit down and have a conversation about it.
with the gun control thing, I don't think anybody would agree with whatever, mass shootings.
Yeah.
What the disagreement is on is what do we do about it?
Yeah.
And and so the polarization comes when you think the only answer
Yes.
is to control guns, which I don't. I'm an advocate of gun control, but I don't believe that's the only answer. And maybe it's
Yeah.
because of what we do. I think there's this huge mental health issue
Yeah.
in the country with and lack of accessibility. But again,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother topic. But I think,
Right.
and sometimes you may hear people bring it up, but I think that's pretty rare because they get stuck
Hmm.
on this idea that if you have the right gun control, it's going to stop it. I don't believe that's true. I don't think it would happen, and I think it would just emerge some other way. But I think that here our healthcare system, which includes mental health,
Yeah.
I think is broken.
Right.
And so, and sometimes people talk about that, but in relation to gun control, I think there's a huge component to
I
that.
agree.
Anyway,
I
so we'll
Yeah.
get off that. But
Right. Right.
I agree with you. You find the common ground. Nobody
Yeah.
wants this to happen.
Hmm.
So how about we look at other options other than the one that polarizes everybody,
Yeah.
which is going to be the gun control? It's always going to polarize people. How
Hmm.
about we start looking at other options? and be, look outside the box, for heaven's sake.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So again, takeaway,
I think it's commonalities.
Yes, commonality. Find the common ground, right? Because, Mark, one thing that we definitely can agree on is we want people to be happy.
Right. And we both agree that there are various ways to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you and I also have common values.
Yes. We have very strong
around family, around kids, we have strong moral values.
Yes.
It's just, you do it one way and I do it another way, and that's okay. But I think we are in total agreement on so many things. So commonalities. I agree with you. That's the takeaway.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it seems like you disagree on more than you do agree on, that doesn't mean you have to be best friends with this person that you disagree with. It just means that you can see it from their point of view.
Right. But I think if you look closely, I think we agree more than we disagree. I really believe that. I see it every day.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. Okay. So I hope everybody enjoyed this discussion.
Have enjoyed our conversation, Liz.
Yes, it was a really good conversation. We didn't get to everything we were originally planning to, but that's okay.
That's often the case.
Yes, it really is. People can see our outlines.
Yeah.
All right, so next week we are going to talk about stress. And a lot of it is because I feel like I should give it an explanation of why the podcast has been a little erratic lately.
Well, you've had stressful things.
I have.
Health issues that are with you and your children.
Yes. So we're going to get into that next week. Okay. And then we're also going to obviously tie it into mental health and coping effectively with stress. And so while, yes, I have had stress, my head has not come up off my shoulders yet. And I have not completely blown a gasket because I feel like I have pretty good coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into all that. Okay. And in the meantime, we will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.